Hey, you guys. So I was thinking, hold on, let me turn this fan off. I was thinking about I was thinking about the conversation that I had yesterday with, I can't really remember his name, but remember in the conversation yesterday when I was talking to the man who brought, went kind of did a deep dive into why divestment for Black women would never work. And so as he was talking, I was thinking to myself, but of course, I wanted to engage him in conversation and I wanted to be polite because I'm polite. But I was thinking to myself, this reminds me of abuse, like some of the stuff that he was saying. And it got me thinking after, because I go back through the lives, I check the chat, I make sure nothing's too outlandish going in the chat. And I was like, I really want to talk to the ladies about emotional abuse tactics. And if you heard that conversation between the two of us, I'm not going to replay the conversation, but if you heard the conversation between the two of us, and when I was hearing his talking points, these are things that I've heard like throughout the YouTube and social media spaces. And I wanted to use some examples from that conversation and kind of pair them with signs of emotional abuse. And it's very disheartening to think that there are narratives running around that are run of the mill emotional abuse. Um, and that so many men are comfortable engaging in abusive tactics. If you've ever, and I've shared my story of having been in a relationship with a man that was both physically and emotionally abusive toward me, and how I learned so much from that relationship. And I really learned that that's why when he would say something, I'd respond, um, and not so much in defense of Black women or anything, but because, as I grew as a person, I learned to protect myself, right? And to stay grounded in reality and in truth when somebody is doing things that are meant to demean you, right? And to garner control over you. Now, I don't know if he was intentionally doing this or not when we were talking yesterday, but the more I thought about it, the more I knew that I could use this conversation that he and I had yesterday to shed a bigger light on some of the damages that are going on in these social media streets and maybe damages that are going on in your relationships. Um, and of course, women can emotionally abuse as well. We can do this to our children, right? We can do this to our partners. This is often directed at children and women, though. So let's talk about it. Let's just get into it. So let's talk about emotional abuse tactics. And again, I'm correlating this to the conversation I had yesterday with the brother's name, who I can't remember. You guys probably remember his name. That was my first time meeting him. So it's no disrespect to him. I don't quite recall his name. Um, so putting you down either directly or indirectly, and sometimes it's done in a joking way. And I noticed when he was talking, again, I don't have a divestment channel, but that was the conversation that we were having. So in the conversation of divestment, that's what he was doing. He was putting Black women down repeatedly. It's a tactic he went back to over and over and over again, right? Um, Nobody, saying things like, nobody is really wanting you. No, if they want you, they just want you for sex. Um, just constantly putting Black women down, um, trying to chip away at the self esteem of Black women who want to divest. And again, I don't have a divestment channel, but it's not okay to try to control somebody by putting them down. I think what I learned from my experiences dealing with men who do this is it's a sign of weakness and insecurity. A lot of times when men are weak and they feel insecure, and I'm sure many of you have been in relationships with a man or a woman who is constantly nitpicking you and constantly putting you down, that's actually a sign of emotional abuse. Someone who does not want to uplift you, but who feels that one way that they can gain control is to make you feel bad about yourself, is emotionally abusive. So that was the first thing that stood out. And this is a genuine sign of emotional abuse. Making suggestions on what you should or should not do, but those suggestions do not come from a good place. And that conversation we were having again yesterday, that's what he was doing. And that's why I say, why don't you just say that you love Black women? And he said, well, I don't have a problem with Black women, which indicates that. Okay, so you won't say that you love Black women. You won't say you care about their interests. So that's why you're making these arguments. You won't say you don't want to see them get hurt. So what you're saying isn't coming from a good place, right? Um, and that constant suggestion, well, Black women can't divest, they shouldn't divest. The dogmatic, and again, I'm not promoting divestment, but that was the heart of the conversation. That dogmatic, this is what you should not do, this is what you should not do. That's actually a sign of emotional abuse, not giving advice, but when that advice doesn't come from a good place, but it comes from a controlling place, when that advice is not meant to better you or enrich you, but that is meant to control what you do or do not do. So the first one was putting you down. The second one is making suggestions about what you should do and what you should not do. But those suggestions are not coming from a good place. They're just designed to maintain control, right? The guiding of what you ought to do or ought not to do is only being done because of the desire for control. Another one is catastrophizing. This is a really good one, right? So they will say, oh, I'm just looking out for you, right? I'm just trying to inform you. That's kind of literally what he said yesterday. I'm just trying to, I want the community to be informed, but by the community he meant Black women, right? Um, when really what the person's trying to do is to erode your self confidence by playing the what if game. And that's something that I noticed he did in that conversation many times. So he would say, well, just because so first he said, they don't even want to approach you. Like, the men I know don't even want to go into areas where there are Black women. They don't even want to be around Black women. And then he changed when I said, well, isn't that disrespectful to you as a Black man if white people, white men are literally sitting there telling you they don't even want to be around Black women? Then he changed it to, well, if they come in and they approach you, you might be flattered, but all they want you for is sex. Like, what if? What if they approach you? What if you feel flattered? But what if they only want you for sex? Playing the what if game or catastrophizing, saying any engagement that you do have will be negative. That was his argument. Any engagement that you do have will be negative. So they make it seem like if you step outside of the realm of the suggestion they make, right? So first they put you down, then they make suggestions of what you should or should not do, then they catastrophize it. Well, if you don't listen to what I said you shouldn't do, or if you don't do what I said you should do, then it's going to be a catastrophe, right? Something horrible is going to happen to you. And I just think that the conversation he and I were having is such a good conversation for what emotional abuse looks like, right? What it looks like when somebody is being abusive towards you. This could be in your private life, right? And sometimes people are abusive and it's so much a part of their personality, they don't even recognize it as abuse. But a lot of people are abusive and they are methodical, right? About that abuse. It's very intentional, it's very calculated. Um, so the next one is one-sided power games. This argument that that person may have the power, but you don't have the power, right? I have the power, but you don't have the power. And he literally said that. Black men can do it, but you can't do it. And again, I don't care one whit about divestment like that. You know what I mean? It doesn't even matter to me. This was his conversation that he wanted to have, even though this is not a divestment channel. Interracial dating is not a significant part of anything that I ever discuss. But it was important for him, right? in his mind to bring up that conversation, to have that conversation. But that one-sided power game, right? Well, we can do it, but you can't do it, right? I have the power, but you don't have the power. Those one-sided power games, not just within that conversation, but if you are in a situation where somebody is doing that to you, playing a one-sided power game, that is actually a red flag for emotional abuse. When we're talking about vetting men and who's a good man, these are the things you should be looking out for. Is he subtly putting you down, right? Is he making suggestions about what you should or should not do, but those suggestions aren't coming from a good place? It's just he wants you to do what he wants you to do. Is he catastrophizing things? Is he making it seem like, well, if you do this, then something horrible is going to happen? Is he engaging in one-sided power games, right? Where he has all the power to act or to move or to make decisions, but you are beneath, right? You're beneath that sort of power. So you shouldn't do it at all. And then there's degradation and the suppression of potential, right? So we saw this in that conversation I was having yesterday when he was saying, look, no one wants you. Black men don't even want you. You'll never succeed. It's never going to happen for you, right? So this attempt to degrade, the attempt to suppress people's potential, right? All of those things, to degrade and to suppress people's potential, those are signs of abuse. Because once you have a person putting you down, if you absorb that, once you have a person degrading you, then you're less likely to not to resist any suggestions they make. You're less likely to not believe them when they tell you that if you don't listen to them, what's going to happen to you is going to be a catastrophe, right? You're less likely to realize that it's not okay for somebody to claim that they have all the potential, but you have no potential, right? So they degrade you. And again, when we're having that conversation, him saying that, right? Nobody wants you guys. We don't even want you guys. Nobody's going to want anybody we don't want, right? Correct? So as he's saying this in this conversation we're having in hindsight, I'm like, these are things where if I were engaging a man one on one and we were partners, to me, that would be a red flag for an abusive man, a man that has a low self esteem. And that is a man that I would then pass on. When we're talking about vetting men, I'm going to pass on a man, right, that is constantly putting me down. I'm going to pass on a man that is making suggestions about what I should or should not do, but those suggestions are coming from a place of desiring to control, not to help. I'm going to pass on a man that catastrophizes everything, right? If you don't do what I say, it's going to be a disaster. You're going to get used for sex. um, I'm going to pass on a man who says, well, right, has grandiose ideations of themselves, but is constantly belittling me. We're going to pass on men that are constantly degrading us, that are constantly suppressing the potential, that are threatened if you do anything to accomplish anything, if you are trying to get your body together, if you're trying to carry yourself better, if you're trying to get an education, all those things, that degradation, that suppression of potential. And like I said, in that conversation, I saw a lot of that. When he said, we don't even want you. So who's going to want what we don't want? That was crazy to me. I said, wow, if that's not an attempt to degrade Black women. You can't go anywhere because who's going to want you if I don't? Who's been in a relationship with a man who was abusive and he says, nobody else is going to want you. I'm the only one who's going to want to be bothered with you, right? That's like a classic sign of abuse, a classic sign of abuse. And the next one is using social prejudices. And this was something that he did throughout the conversation that we had. For those of you who heard that conversation, he was using social prejudices. these things that we know society has already laid on Black women, basically saying people don't like Black women. So why would you think you could be with anybody else? But he said that right after he said Black men don't want you. So it's like, okay, so Black men don't want us. And now you're saying nobody else in society is going to want us either. Right? This attempt to just chip away at the collective value and self-esteem of Black women. And this is why I told him, look, this is not the way. If you have a problem with divestment, first of all, it's weird for you to come to a channel that's not a divestment channel and have this conversation. But second of all, if you think being abusive, right, to Black women is going to make them go, well, golly, I'm just going to be with Black men now. I'm just not going to talk about divestment anymore. No, because a healthy minded thinking woman is going to hear you putting Black women down, is going to hear those ill faith, faith suggestions where you're simply trying to control people by telling them what to do, is going to hear you catastrophizing any decision that a Black woman makes. You're only going to be wanted for sex. You're going to be thrown away, right? They're going to hear that one-sided power game. Black men can be with white women and other groups of women, but you'll never be able to. They're going to hear that that constant degradation, that suppression of potential. You saying nobody wants Black women. We don't even want you. Nobody's going to want what we don't want, right? They're going to hear that use of social prejudices, literally taking an ode to racism and making that why the world, men outside of the Black community will never want Black women. They're going to hear all that and say, this is the abuse that I don't want. This is exactly why I'm divesting. This is exactly why I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be in a community where I'm constantly being abused. I don't want a man saying all this, but he wouldn't say that he loved Black women or cared about Black women or didn't want to see them hurt. So you're not even saying this because you care about me. You're not even saying this because you feel a loss of something. You're saying Black men don't even want me. So then if Black men don't want Black women, then what is this other than abuse? Because ladies, you can be in a relationship with a man and he be very abusive towards you and be cheating on you at the same time because he does not value you. And that's why I said the tactics that he was using are classic emotional abuse tactics. And any right thinking woman, he's not going to convince them to not divest. He's going to convince them that this is what we're running from. We are running from being abused. And this is something that I hear coming from Black women a lot. I'm moving away from being abused. I'm moving away from a community and an environment where I'm constantly being damaged and hurt. And again, I don't promote divestment, but I definitely think a pattern on my channel that is very unfortunate is if I try to have a productive conversation with Black women, it never, ever, 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 ever fails that a Black man comes up and he basically validates all of the negative things that Black women think about Black men, right? He validates all of those negative things. And that's very unfortunate because if you can come to a channel like mine, where I don't have a channel where I say really anything negative about Black men, I shoot straight to men and women on this channel. But if a man will come here and use this platform as an opportunity to get his rocks off and basically throw abusive language toward Black women in an attempt to control and manipulate them, well, then that says a lot. And it's very unfortunate because I guarantee a lot of women walked away from that conversation that we were having yesterday and said, this is why I don't flex with them. This is why I don't do Black men. This is why I don't like Black men. This is why Black men are a problem, right? All of the tactics that he used, yeah, KR Black said, that's what I was saying yesterday. He just wants to abuse us. Yeah, that was very emotionally abusive. And That's why, and in the conversation, right? Because we were having a conversation, my automatic response was to invalidate his abuse. That was my autopilot response. Can I invalidate the abusive things he's saying? Right? But when I walked away from the conversation, because you know what it's like, you're in fight or flight mode, right? So I'm holding the panel and he's talking. So I'm like, all right, when he says something, I'm going to say something logical to devalue what he has said because what he is saying is not reality. And abusers often say things that aren't rooted in reality because reality is not the thing that matters, right? What matters is that you can perpetuate abuse. So after I walked away from that conversation, I was like, this conversation is a really great example of what emotional abuse looks like. And it's unfortunate that that abuse was directed at Black women as a whole, right? At Black women as a whole. And I want to say, while we're using that conversation to point out abusive tactics, sometimes we talk about how do we vet a man, right? How do we ensure that the man that we chose is a man that we can be safe with? Yeah, he went out of his way to say, he went out of his way to say that Black women weren't wanted. That was really the point. Nobody wants you. Everybody just wants you for sex. He kept driving that home. He really did. Yeah. But I think that's the thing too. And I think that's why sometimes when women say, when women say, you know, it doesn't matter how feminine you are. It doesn't matter how kind you are. Some men will just be abusive no matter what. And this is why, honestly, because I used to have a lot of conversations with the guys in the manosphere, but this is why I stopped talking to the guys in the manosphere because I'm consistent. My personality is consistent everywhere that I go. But it didn't matter how logical or polite or level headed I was. When a man simply hates women, none of that matters, right? It doesn't matter how beautiful you are, how fit you are, how polite you are, how feminine you are, how respectful you are. They won't reciprocate that. Some men don't have it in them to reciprocate that. And so when we're talking about vetting men, I think that conversation that I had yesterday is an excellent example of what emotional abuse looks like. Run for the hills. Run for the hills when you find a man that's constantly putting you down. Remember that I told you I was in a relationship and my mascara. This is how nitpicky he was. So I used to wear, and I've talked about this before, I used to wear I think it's L'Oreal voluminous mascara. Okay, it's probably not L'Oreal, but you guys know what I'm saying. The voluminous mascara, you can get it like at Target and stuff like that, or at Walgreens. So I used to wear the voluminous mascara. Um, and I really like that mascara. I wore that mascara for years and years and years. Now I wear Christian Dior Show. I changed my mascara because when I was in a relationship with an emotionally abusive man, he looked at my mascara and he was talking negatively about my mascara. He was talking about how my eyelashes looked and this and that. And at the time, I was too young and too inexperienced to really understand that he was putting me down and he was attempting to degrade me so that he could gain control over me, right? So that dragging me down, I'm using mascara as an example, and I changed my mascara, y'all. And I mean, I love Dior Show mascara. It's beautiful mascara. It's what I use. But the point is, I changed the mascara I was using for all those years because he put me down, and he was constantly putting me down. He would put down the way that I dressed. Um, he would put down just little things about me, and I always had really, high self-esteem. I never esteemed myself above anybody else, but I was like, I'm beautiful, I'm intelligent, I come from a good family, I think I'm a good catch, right? But his process, because he had low self-esteem, was to constantly bring me down a few pegs, constantly bring me down a few pegs. And so when we experience, whether it be in the online world or in our personal relationships, men who have low self-esteem, and so because their self-esteem is low, they feel the only way they can control you is to bring you down a few levels, right? And I think a lot of Black men, because of their social status, right? And this is not all Black men, but when you are a man and you lack power and resources and control, part of that, right, could reflect itself in trying to place somebody beneath you and kind of punching downward at whoever you can punch downward at. And unfortunately, that ends up being women and children, right? And in our conversation yesterday, you could see he was punching down on women. He was saying, you know, we must keep having somebody beneath us. And so I'm going to put you down. I'm going to degrade you, right? I'm going to remind you of racism and that society doesn't like Black, and they surely aren't going to like a Black woman, right? But it was interesting how he used that tactic, but then he excluded Black men from that, right? He excluded Black men from that as if the world doesn't see us as a package deal. Um, that's why whether we're online or in our personal relationships, you guys, we really, yeah, feminine vibes. He said Black women can't do what Black men do. And that goes back to um, that one-sided power game. I have the power, but you don't. People who play one-sided power games are emotionally abusive, right? I have the power, but you don't have the power. In his case, he was saying, we Black men have the power to have anybody love us, but you Black women, nobody else is going to love you. In fact, he said Black men don't even love you. Isn't that what he said? Black men don't want you. And nobody else will either. Like I said, it's that abusive partner who says, who's going to want you? Where are you going to go? Nobody else is going to want you. I'm the only one who's going to put up with you, right? A lot of women have experienced that in their personal relationships. And I have to be honest, I think a lot of people who are abusive in their private lives, who are abusive toward women and children in their private lives, social media has given them a platform to openly be abusive. And you have hordes of abusive men coming together and kind of feeding off of each other's dysfunction and feeding off of each other's negative energy and abusive energy and reinforcing this abusive behavior as normal and okay, which is very problematic. That is extremely problematic. And it's something that I hope, it's something that I definitely would hope that the good Black men, right, that those good Black men would correct. I would love to see more men correcting men who are emotionally abusive and gathering together to engage in emotionally abusive tactics. And what's crazy to me is you have Black women who are very low self-esteem. You have Black women who are very masochistic in unhealthy ways. You have those women who actually take this in, they take this in, they absorb it, and they live and breathe by what these men say. They actually are taking the advice of men who engage in widespread communal emotional abuse. They don't even recognize it as abusive. And these are women. And that's why I said the other day, when you're thinking about taking advice from a man or listening to a man or whether you should put value in what a man is saying, don't let it just be because he has a penis, right? Because all men aren't good. All men, just because they have penises, are not authority figures, right? All men are not, and what I mean is men have authority because at the end of the day, the strongest person is going to win the battle, right? So men have authority over women by default. But as far as us absorbing and following and heeding to the word of a man, we should never do that if he is not a man that we would choose to be with. There are a lot of men out here who are giving advice, a lot of men out here that are engaging in emotional abusive tactics, right? And those are men. I always think to myself, you're not a man I would want to be with. I would be miserable in a relationship with you. You seem like a horrible person. You seem like an abusive person. You seem like a harmful person. And so then that's going to be a man that I'm not going to listen to. Yeah. 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 And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, the divine feminine, because remember, he started attacking Black women. He started attacking Black women under the guise of divestment. And I'm so glad you bring that up, the divine feminine, because remember, the context of the conversation when he came up was about what Black men can build, right? And he was saying he didn't like this revolutionary ideology of institution building. He didn't like the revolutionary ideology of possibly having to engage in protection, right? Which requires coercive force. He said that that was, I can't remember the exact wording he used, but basically a pipe dream. This idea that Black men were ever going to engage in that kind of behavior was a pipe dream, right? And when I said, when you say that it is a pipe dream, when you say that Black women should have zero hope, that Black men are going to engage in the behaviors that every other man on the planet is engaging in, and that our men are the only men who aren't going to engage in those behaviors, then you give validity to the women who say that Black men are a lost cause. And I was really saying to him, like, Black men, be careful what you say. Why are you out here? How do you have a problem with the Cynthia G's or the divestments, uh, content creators of the world? But then you come up on a platform where you're talking to a Black woman who believes that you can accomplish all these things. And you go, I don't know why you're holding your breath, because we're never going to do that. I don't care what other men are doing. I guarantee you this, we won't do that. We're not about to fight for our own liberation, because being in the army is something different. Being in the army, they have guns, they give us food. I mean, that's what he said, right? And you're so right, the divine feminine. It was in the context of that conversation when I pushed back and I said, when you say there's no chance that Black men will ever act, then you give credence to all of the groups of women who are saying, you know what, screw this. They keep telling us they're not going to do anything. And this is exactly why I don't flex with them. Right. And in response to me saying that to him, basically saying, watch your words, just like I told the ladies yesterday. And what's crazy is it's not like I haven't said this to the ladies. Literally, wasn't my live yesterday when I was talking about how we deal with little Black boys? Wasn't the point of that is let's be careful with the arguments that we make, lest they be used against us or be used against our daughters, right? So I wasn't saying anything to him that I hadn't already said to women. But his response to that, as the divine feminine so eloquently pointed out, was then to say that you're not worth anything. Nobody wants you. He was like, you know what? You know what's a pipe dream, or whatever he said? You know what's delusional? That anybody else will ever want you, that you could ever divest, that any group of men would ever desire you. He said, we don't even want you. Why would anybody want something we don't want? Right? You're absolutely right, the divine feminine. That was literally the context of how he went on this rant about divestment. But the rant was less about divestment and it was more about why Black women are inadequate and not wanted. And he was spewing all that. He was spewing all that under the guise of divestment. But I was like, but I don't have a divestment channel. I don't even talk about that. This is the most literally yesterday and in this live is the most I've ever talked about divestment on this channel. So you come to a place that doesn't talk about divestment, that isn't a divestment channel, and because you're triggered, because I said you're proving these women right, and I'm wanting him to stop and think about the words that are leaving your mouth, sir. Think about the words that are leaving your mouth when you say Black men will never do these things. Is that really what you want to put out in the ether? And his response was to start attacking Black women en masse. And these kind of emotionally abusive tactics, I just want us as women, we need, and that's why I say I don't put my energy toward men who behave this way, right? I'm glad Brother Q came out to balance things out, but I don't put my energy toward men that behave this way. We cannot, as women, because even if you feel disdain for men that are abusive, disdain for platforms online that are extremely abusive, when you take your little ears and you go to these platforms and you choose to listen to these men spew hatred and degradation and all of these things at you, for you to think that you walk away from that unaffected is delusional. We need to not even be listening to these people. We need to not be going to those platforms. We should not know what's going on there. You know what I'm saying? You'll notice there's a lot of people I have not talked about on this channel. There are a lot of male content creators who have been very viral in the past few months. And if any of you have been wondering why I don't talk about them, is I refuse. First of all, I don't listen to them. I only know they exist because they're viral, so I can see people are making videos about them, but I'm not listening to that content. I'm not going to pollute myself with that. I'm not even going to put myself in an environment where I'm going to hear abusive things or watch abusive tactics toward women that look like me. I'm not going to do it because we cannot, ladies, walk away from that, whether we agree or disagree with them, whether it makes us angry or not. We don't come out of that unscathed. We don't. And sometimes when you hate watch people, right? Sometimes when you hate watch people, you actually help them grow. You help blow them up. Asia said, if this is how they talk to women publicly, imagine what they do and say to women when no witnesses are present. I agree, Asia. I think the way that these men are speaking, I feel sorry for the women that are in relationships with them, if any women are at all. I know that they have found some woman whose self-esteem is very low, some woman who's probably impoverished, some woman who doesn't know any better, has never been taught better, some woman that doesn't value herself. And I can just imagine the abuse that she has suffered and that she is suffering at the hands of some of these men. It's very unfortunate. And this is why we cannot be contributing to their platforms. I agree with you, Asia. If this is their open dialogue, to openly come out and say, basically, you're worthless. Nobody wants you. We don't want you. You can never. You'll only be wanted for sex. That's something too. When a man wants to degrade women, they always try to reduce us down to our vaginas. Like you're literally a vagina. That's all you are, is a vagina. That's all anybody's thinking about, is a vagina. That dehumanization, that's very dehumanizing, and that is a purposeful tactic. That's a purposeful tactic that men who despise and want to control women, that's a tactic that they use. And so I mean, not just the women, that they're in relationships with, but what if they have daughters? Some of these men have daughters. They have young women, little girls that are in their vicinity. Can you imagine the trauma that comes with being around somebody that has such vitriol and hatred toward people who look like them? That I think is a very good point, Asia. I completely agree. So, I just wanted to, well, yeah, that's why I said we have to stop listening to their rhetoric. We know that these spaces are spaces. We know, Rod, right, that these spaces are spaces where you have degenerate men get together, foaming at the mouth in their own degeneracy. And we as women, we do not belong in those spaces. We should not be listening to those people. We should not be over there absorbing that. We should know, just like you would, I would hope you ladies would never, ever, ever give a man like that the time of day in real life. They should not get our time online. That puts money in their pocket. When we show up to those spaces, even if we just want to feel angry, even if we're just there because we can't stand that man, when we show up to those spaces, we're putting money in their pocket. Whether we super chat or not, we're putting money in their pockets. We're adding to their viewership. But most importantly, we are affected by what is said there. Whether you think you're affected or not, you cannot get into the mud. You cannot swim through the mire and come out clean. So we really have to separate ourselves as women from those environments. That is not a place that any self-respecting woman belongs. Not at all. We should not even expose ourselves to that. Like I said, this is why I stopped trying to have civilized conversations with the people in the manosphere. I used to, because I didn't know that they got together in hordes and acted crazy like that. So when I first came to YouTube, and and because I liked, let's say I might like O'Shea, right? I might like him. So I'd go over to his platform because he would invite me. But then I'd be on a panel with all of these men who hate women. I'd be in the 2000 deep in the chat with all these men who hate women. And it didn't matter how feminine or how pretty or how respectful, none of that matters. We don't belong there. And that is something I had to recognize. We can't reason with anybody over there. We're not about to convince anybody over there to do better. We're not about to exemplify, value to anybody and then be like, oh, well, I just woke up. I just met a Black woman who has value. I just met a Black woman who's intelligent and articulate and feminine and beautiful. We're not going to go over there and change the price of bread for these men. So we just don't belong there. But I think one thing we can learn when they come to our spaces, right? Because I heard somebody say that the guy that I was talking to yesterday is a dating coach. Honestly, you guys, I've never heard of him before. If he has a YouTube channel, I knew nothing about it because I don't pay attention to the content that those men make. I thought he was just a random dude coming up on my platform. And he may not be a dating coach, honestly. I don't know. But I felt like somebody in the chat said that. Um, but I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong about that. But we have to like separate ourselves from that. The Divine Feminine said, Irene was literally trying to help his argument and he was devolved in front of our eyes into red pill rhetoric. Yeah, that was crazy. That was crazy. You're right. I was trying to stop a train wreck, is what I was trying to do. Because you guys know, I always get so discouraged when I try to have conversations on this platform and then the Black men come and reaffirm, you know, all of the negative stereotypes that I see, Black women have really embraced. It's disappointing for me. It's disappointing that that happens so often on my channel. I think this is the worst place for that to happen because I do attempt to be so fair, but time and time again, they come and they just toss the spot. And it's like, why would you come here and do that? I mean, I don't even think, let's say if they just hate Black women and all of that. it's not even pragmatic to come to a platform like mine and behave that way. That is super counterproductive. Like, of all the platforms on YouTube, this is possibly one of the worst platforms to come to. You know what I mean? This is like, this is like if you sell cars, right? And you go to a channel where, or you sell used cars, and you go to a channel where, all over YouTube, everybody's talking about how trashy used car salesmen are, how they're always cheating you, how they always sell you lemons. And then you come to a platform where somebody's like, you know what? All used cars aren't bad, and all used car salesmen are not bad. And we really need to support the used car salesmen that are doing the right job, the right thing. And, let's not be too hard on them. And then you come onto the platform and say, yeah, I'll sell you a lemon. So what if the, I don't know anything about cars, so what if the engine's going to blow out 1 week after you take it off the lot? It's like, sir, why would you come? I'm trying to help you. Like, I'm, I'm trying to help you out. Why would you come over here and act a booty? Why would you come over here and act an actual ass like that? Why would you do that? That's not smart. That's not even pragmatic. Have enough sense to pretend. You know what I'm saying? Have enough sense to fake the funk. Like, you are not about to manipulate anybody because you're really bad at manipulation. This would have been the panel for you to come on and at least make believe like you have some sense, sir. Take a hint. Right? Divine feminine, you're right. I'm trying to save him from throwing himself over a cliff. And he just goes freaking ballistic and starts dragging Black women. It's like, sir, calm down. Maybe don't drag Black women over here. maybe maybe you picked the wrong channel to come and do that on. Maybe you forgot where you were. I mean, I don't know. That was absolutely crazy to me. But anyway, y'all. Anyway, you guys, I just thought that the conversation I had yesterday was an excellent example of emotional abuse tactics. I just want to go over them again because I feel very strongly that we need to not be going and listening to the content of these men. We don't want to give them the numbers. Okay. We don't want to give them the numbers. I honestly feel we should not be promoting them. That's why there are some people's names you never hear on my channel. Some platforms' names you never hear me say on this channel because I don't even want to promote them. Right? Because whether it's a negative look or a positive look, I'm not trying to add to their light at all. I'm trying to, like, you don't exist to me. Right? So I think we need to stop giving them our viewership, and we need to stop putting ourselves in situations where we are passively being abused, right? You can't experience somebody talking abusive about women like you for hours on end and just come out of that unscathed. Right? Something masochistic in us keeps us going to these channels to listen to that negative content. And we need to really just stop doing that. But whether it be on YouTube or in our personal lives, right? Yeah, even searching them, right? Because it panders to the algorithm when you put their names in. It does pander to the algorithm, you guys. And also, when we, even when we are, let's say we search them and we're looking for videos of people saying that they're bad, even when we're doing that, we're letting other content creators know that they can make money by talking about them. So then everybody starts talking about them because everybody's chasing the bag. But we want people to realize like, well, there's no point in talking about them because nobody's going to watch the video, right? We just need to be pragmatic. If we want to shut these people up, then we have to diminish their numbers. We have to ensure that they don't go viral with their ignorance. We have to be now what we can do is we can talk in generalities about certain behaviors and talking points. And the people who are listening to that content will draw the conclusion that we're talking about these types of people. But we, I think, on our side have to be pragmatic too, that we aren't engaging in behaviors that uplift abusers, right? that create a lucrative area for people who are abusive toward us to thrive because their money is made off of consumption. And so we have to really cut off the Black female part of that consumption. So, if you have a man or in general a content provider, online or offline, that is constantly putting you down, whether they are putting you down directly or indirectly, that is a sign of emotional abuse. If you have a man that is making suggestions on what you should or should not do, but those suggestions are not coming from a good place, that is an attempt to control you, and it is a sign of emotional abuse. If I'm using yesterday's example, it's when he was saying, and again, I don't promote divestment, but he was talking about divestment. That was his topic of choice. And that's when he was saying, that Black men don't want Black women, but Black women should not try to divest, because he went into catastrophizing, which is the next one. Catastrophizing is when you make it like, if you don't do what I want you to do, it's going to be a disaster. So first he made the suggestion, Black women should not try to divest. In fact, you cannot divest. Then he catastrophized it, which is the third point of abuse. And he said, because you're only going to be used, you're only going to be wanted for sex, right? So when somebody catastrophizes something, they claim that if you don't do what they say, it's going to end in catastrophe, right? The fourth sign of abuse is one-sided power games. And that conversation we were having, it's when he was like, Black men can have anybody they want. We're the most desired. We can divest, but you Black women can never divest, right? One-sided power games is a sign of emotional abuse. And again, this is not to promote divestment, but that was the topic of the conversation that he chose. He chose this topic. I didn't choose the topic. Um, Degradation and suppression of potential, right? So a person will degrade you to suppress your potential. And a perfect example from that conversation was when he said, we don't even want you, meaning Black men don't even want you. Nobody's going to want what we don't want. So the degrading part of that was, we don't even want you. Basically, you're trash to Black men. And then the suppression of potential was, if we don't want you and we're Black, what makes you think anybody else is going to want you? Nobody else is going to want you. So that is an example of degradation and suppression of potential. And then the sixth and last point that I had in this live was using social prejudices. So he went back to the race card. Now, in his mind, the race card and the hatred of Blackness did not apply to Black men, but it very much applied in his mind to Black women, right? So in his mind, Black women are undesired because of their Blackness, to the point that he claimed, and I don't really believe this story, because if people were really telling him they didn't want to go somewhere because Black women were there, well, that's disrespectful to him as a whole Black man. But if we are to believe his story, he said that basically the white men that he was talking to were prejudiced, and that they didn't even want to be in an area where there were a lot of Black women. So that's using social prejudices as a way to control. Because you're Black and female, right? That is enough for you to not be desirable. That's enough for you to not be wanted. That's enough that your value is only viewed as sexual. And all of these tactics are done to create a systematic pattern of power and control by people who are weak. I'm specifically talking about men because it's a man that I'm using in this example, but women can use this, right? You might have friends that treat you this way. You might have a girlfriend that's constantly like low key putting you down, right? You might have a girlfriend that's constantly trying to discourage you from bettering yourself, constantly making suggestions to stop you from doing something good. You might have that friend, right, who is constantly making it seem like everything you do is going to end up in a disaster. So don't do it because it's just going to blow up in your face, right? You might have somebody that's constantly elevating themselves, playing those one-sided power games and constantly degrading you so they can do it, but you're beneath the ability to do it. Somebody that's constantly degrading you, constantly trying to suppress your potential, demean any growth that you're trying to have. All of these things, right? Somebody that's constantly using social prejudices, those people who are like, but you're Black, nobody's going to listen to you. You know what I mean? You're Black, they'll never hire you for the job. You know what I'm saying? These are all emotional abuse tactics. These can happen in a relationship. These are definitely things that are happening on social media, right? These can happen with our friendships. We just have to be looking out for this. I think so many Black women grow up being abused, right? So many of us grow up being abused that abusive behavior becomes normal, and we don't often clock things as abusive. And so I think this is also why we do so poorly as a collective in vetting men. Because a man can be clearly abusive, but until somebody slams your head into a wall, you don't recognize what they're doing as abuse. So we need to not have to get our head smashed in to understand abuse. And we need to, both in the real world and in the social media sphere, we need to be very, very careful about not allowing ourselves to be placed in or placing ourselves in abusive situations. We need to really separate ourselves from abusive people. That is the way that we're going to reach our highest potential, is to simply separate ourselves from abusive people. In the real world, you're not going to stress yourself out fixating on what an abusive person is doing. You're going to separate yourself from that abusive person and go live your best life. In the social media world, we need to separate ourselves from these abusive people and live our best lives. We cannot sit and obsess over them. We cannot be watching their content. And in the event like yesterday, when you have somebody that uses abusive tactics and they come into our spaces, we have to be very firm in making it clear that we know the game, right? So for me, my method was simply to refute everything he was saying with a logical response. But in hindsight, and I think it was better this way, I wanted to have a conversation with you guys about what parts of that conversation are classic signs of emotional abuse that can not just be used in social media, but that are often weaponized and used against us in our everyday lives. And so many of us exist in abusive relationships, and we don't know that what we're experiencing, like something in us knows it's not right, but maybe we feel it's too extreme to call it abusive, but it is abusive. And, no one deserves, man or woman, to be abused. So let's try to put ourselves in environments where we are nourished. That doesn't mean we can't be critical with each other, but any criticizing that is given out has to be done from a loving place, right? We should be building each other up. Any platform that's not attempting to build you up, but is just constantly tearing you down, is a platform that we should not be supporting, not with our viewership, and we should not be overarchingly talking about, because we don't want to do anything to help these people gain traction. We want to drown them. We want to starve them out, right? The goal is to starve them out of the algorithm. The goal is to prevent them going viral by, even if we have to talk about them, not talking about them by name, right? We need to starve these people out of the algorithm. And we have to be smarter. We have to understand how the algorithm works, and we have to be smarter about how we approach these things so that we aren't feeding the beast. So anyway, you guys, I'm going to get out of here. But let me know what you think. Do you think I'm putting too much on it if you heard the conversation yesterday? Or do you think um, my little breakdown of emotional abuse tactics based on that conversation that I was having yesterday, that those are valid and those are things that we should be watching out for? And that was what we were experiencing in that conversation. Let me know your opinion in the comment section. I'll talk to you guys later.